Keys to the Commonwealth, a podcast where we share the real stories of local community members who are using real estate to build personal wealth, along with tips and tricks from professionals across the industry. And now, your host, Landry Fields.
Welcome back, everybody, to another podcast episode. We are going to dive into everything in an investor story that a friend of mine that I have, but he is also an engineer as well. And so we're going to be able to kind of talk about a few different things involving just what goes into planning processes, due diligence, and so forth like that when it comes to developing maybe something that from scratch, on a raw piece of land or something that's there. So we're going to kind of dive into all of that today. So without further ado, Daniel Rehner is on the show today. Daniel, appreciate you coming on the show with us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we've known each other quite a bit for a while now, and been a part of your kind of, we both watched each other's journeys in some respect as far as real estate investing as well, which is why you kind of got two aspects of the kind of topics today. Give us a little bit about your background, where you're from, growing up real quick and so forth.
Yeah. The where are you from question is always a longer story.
Right.
But the short version is I was born in the U.S. I was born in Mississippi, but I grew up in Costa Rica. I lived there for 8 years, 2 4-year stints. My parents were missionaries down there. So I went to all Spanish-speaking school, learned Spanish.
Yeah.
And then we came back up here to Kentucky in high school, and I've been here ever since. So I've been here the longest now, so I guess I can say I'm from here.
From Kentucky.
But I've got a lot of background in me. Let's see what else. Married.
Yeah. I went to Asbury.
I went to Asbury.
Yeah.
We played some ball together at different times. And married, have 3 daughters now, 7, 5, and about to be 3.
Yeah.
So hands full with that.
That's right. Same, similar ages as mine. We both have daughters named Hazel, which is always...
Yes.
We thought we were both being real unique with that name. And,
Absolutely.
and they're really cool.
Same
They're
age.
good friends, which is cool.
That is great.
But then you went to engineering at UK to kind of finish up as well.
Yes,
After
I
that,
did the 3-2 program at Asbury. They've got a program when you go 3 years at Asbury. I was able to play soccer while I was there, and then went to UK and finished. Ended up being like 2.5 years. They just got a lot of courses to cram in there, and it was a really good experience.
Yeah.
And from there, I went and started working out kind of more in the construction inspection side of engineering for 2-3 years, and then I was at a design build engineering company for another 3 years. So I saw some pretty big projects on that side. I moved to South Carolina for a year. It was like a $15 million project or something, but then ended up switching over to the design side where I'm at now at Thoroughbred Engineering, and we do quite a bit it's a full service engineering firm, and we do, me specifically, my role is working with a lot of developers, a lot of commercial, residential, subdivisions, all types of different projects from the engineering side.
Nice. So let's, before we dive into that, I mean, as far as you also have been a big, we're always kind of looking at similar properties, the same properties, it seems like, and so forth from a real estate. So you've kind of built up a portfolio of habitational rentals, either single-family duplex or triplex type of scenarios, if I remember right.
Yep.
So what kind of got you into that then to begin with, or what was your first property with that?
Well, I was thinking about that coming into this, and I feel like my background has been a little bit entrepreneurial for a while. Like, my dad was a missionary, but he's a businessman at heart too as well.
Oh, yeah.
I remember going to school, and before going, we'd make little sandwiches and bring them and sell them to our friends for 25 cents. This is back in like elementary school, and until the local cafeteria said you got to stop bringing that stuff because you're going to put us out of business. And then me and my brother in college had a little book business. We'd buy back from students and sell them on Amazon. The bookstore also labeled us, "Hey, you can't set up shop right outside our bookstore."
So really, truly entrepreneurial from the beginning.
Yeah, and then so I've always had that, and always had the desire to just to be entrepreneurial that way, and being an engineer, a problem solver. So I was looking at new creative ways to try and solve a problem. So. And like a lot of people, it was back in like 2017 was when I got my first property. But leading up to that, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Oh, yeah.
I'd been married for 3 or 4 years at the time, and doing the whole I don't know who has a 9-to-5 job, but it's really 8 to 5 or 8 to 6. I'm like, where's this going to go? And that just got me motivated, and found Bigger Pockets podcast as well. And that just fueled it, and found my first property was ended up being an online auction.
Really?
Hubzu.
Okay.
And it worked out pretty good. It was at the time, it was a duplex. It was listed. Well, it was an online auction, so you were bidding on it. But I ended up getting it for $102.
Okay.
The first proper duplex in Lexington. It was 5 minutes from my house. So I think it was the only way I could have done it at the time.
Yeah.
Because I was still working full time. We had a young, Hazel was, 2. And so fixed it all up and needed new carpet,
Okay.
all that stuff. And so it was 5 minutes from my house.
First
so.
one, then, how'd you finance that first one? Just putting 20% down?
First
hard
one,
money?
I didn't have a home equity line of credit open up yet on our house. We had our personal house, but my dad ended up giving me the bridge loan to get to when I had the home equity line open.
Okay.
And like most people, you jump in, and whether it's a little bit naive, I learned quite a bit on the way, but still, in retrospect, it still was a really good deal.
As long as
to
that first
start
one
with.
can be profitable and
Yes.
a good deal, like you learn so much off just that first one alone. Yeah. And each one you learn more and more. But that first one, I mean, you're like, wow, I didn't know near as much as I thought I did after you kind of complete that first process.
But I think the big thing with that too is still just like I analyze deals probably for months, maybe 8 months, and maybe I'm a little more risk tolerant than most people. I was like,
Sure.
I just got to make a dive, found something that seemed like it made sense. I ran through the calculations, and that's the biggest hurdle most people can't get over is that first one. They'll analyze, and if you got a deal, just go for it.
Yeah, eventually you got to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
So, and that's what we did. Pulling that first trigger. The first trigger is the hardest part of the whole thing. It really is. Like once you pull the trigger the first time, and you at least don't maybe get burned right away type of scenario, or at least kind of that's when everything after that it seems like, all right, I have confidence. I know, I at least know kind of what I'm doing, or at least, enough to know that I'm not going to, I can do this type of scenario. So that's awesome.
My plan at the time too was like, all right, get one every year, maybe 2. I had a 3-year gap before getting my next one, just with having another kid and life going, and then finally it wasn't until kind of my brother, who's my business partner now, we got together. It was 2020, and he was kind of getting on the bandwagon finally, and we joined forces once again, and we got two triplexes in Winchester.
Okay.
Actually, no, one was a quadplex, and the other.
That's right.
Yeah, they both were quadplexes.
I heard about that.
And that kind of got us going there, and so we've been kind of Winchester.
I know,
boys.
so you kind of built up a niche there, and I know, what has that been like as far as difference between, maybe more the Lexington or other central markets? Winchester seems like I lived there for a few years, actually, when I was in probably late elementary and middle school and stuff like that, and it doesn't always have the greatest reputation in some respects, but it's so close, and I feel like you've gotten in on the cusp of something, the kind of the turning of the tide there in a lot of ways. So what have you seen as far as that goes with Winchester?
What I've seen there is, one, just the property values are a lot lower. I mean, a lot of the properties that we're finding are in pretty bad condition. They haven't been kept up like they should.
Right.
And so most of the properties that we find that are a lot cheaper than the ones in Lexington still have quite a bit of work to do. They're not like a property you find in Lexington. But we've also found that though rents are also less than they are in Lexington, just the fact that the properties are that much cheaper, they still work out.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a good property manager down there, because I wouldn't even try to venture to manage any of the properties there just the distance and the hassle of it. But
so you can speak highly of having a property manager, especially when you're working a full-time, both of you guys are working full-time jobs.
I do not have any time with raising a family and being involved with all that, and as much as I work at my day job. So.
Well, I think it's a good transition into more of like the engineering side of things, because part of it stuff is, regarding zoning sometimes, and we'll kind of just touch a little bit on that. But like, as you've found other areas and so forth, like the different zonings, there's a lot of the houses, especially in the Winchester market, it seems like, where they've been converted from single family homes because of the zoning laws allowing that into, duplex, triplex, and so forth like that, which, as you were well aware, causes sometimes other aspects, especially on the insurance side, sometimes a little bit of not a difficulty, but kind of limits some of our options. Yeah, a big thing called secondary egress, and so there's a lot of times, as you've discovered, where, like for example, we just did a triplex, I think, and there was two units on the bottom, one on the top.
Yep.
And in that case, the one on the top has to have a second means of getting down from that second story outside of just that one stairwell type of thing. And if it doesn't, then it usually just limits a lot of our options with who will insure the building in that sense. So, but obviously you've become a bit of an expert on that with several properties having that situation.
I tried to push for the ladder on the outside or the rope ladder, but that's a no-go. Be a little more permanent than that. No, that I've experienced that firsthand, and as long as you incorporate that into your analysis, it usually works out. But speaking to the zoning aspect of it, I mean, I think most seasoned real estate investors get the zoning process of it, but some of the stuff that, especially early on, investors might not realize when they're looking at properties is, one, it's got to be zoned for that.
Yeah.
You can't just switch it over and say, "Oh, I'm going to convert this into duplex or triplex." And even the way you go about doing a zone change matters too. You may not be able to change it.
Yeah.
No matter how much you want to. And if I expand upon that a little bit, like that's been one of the things I love about my job as a civil engineer, working at Thoroughbred, is I've gotten to work for countless different developers to see, I mean, way more projects than I'd see if I was doing them on my own.
Yeah.
And I love the process as much as it, sometimes you're banging your head against the wall with working with planning and zoning and some of these people. I've really enjoyed that process. I love the aspect of analyzing the properties for these developers.
Yeah.
I've worked with, specifically some of the ones I've worked on a lot have been some subdivisions. I've worked on subdivisions in Lexington, in Jessamine County, and Georgetown, and they're all different.
Yeah.
And if you think the process is the same, you'd be wrong.
Right.
Like just for instance, we've had, I'll put two properties together. There's one in Lexington, one in Jessamine County.
Okay.
And the Jessamine County property started with the zone change in 2019, beginning of 2019, and
it was purchased.
It was purchased.
Zone changed for whatever the purpose they were trying to do.
Yes, so it was just agriculturally zoned, and they were switching it to urban development, redevelopment, infill. What Lexington's done.
Does that seem to be the easiest zone that gets changed sometimes?
Well, the leftover properties, it depends. In Lexington's, there's yes and
Meaning
no.
Like from ag standpoint
to something
to
something residential. Usually, it has to do with what's next to it, what's around it, and there's some areas that Lexington specifically identified as, hey, these are when they didn't expand the urban county boundary. Yeah, we want to infill these areas, so they actually were encouraging these developers on these specific properties to do higher density. And so that's what they were going for. So this zone change process started in 2019, and they finally got that approved. They had multiple postponements and delays, and that process probably took almost 6 months just to get the zone change. And then after that, you had to get the development plan approved, which was probably another 3 or 4 months. And then once the development plan was approved, then you had to go to construction drawings. And we're now in 2023, and the final plat is probably today or tomorrow going to finally get signed so they can actually physically sell the lots. So it's been 2019 to 2000.
And that's just from selling lots?
That's just to sell the lots.
Okay, so I started that whole story thinking like you're about to even build something.
Yeah.
And that was like,
so they have developed the roads throughout that time. They do have all the infrastructure put in. Okay. That was a part of the time frame, because once you get like your preliminary subdivision plat, which allows you to develop the lots, you got to install that, then you can get the final plat, then you can sell. And that difference between, if I juxtapose it to Jessamine County, we had a project start in end of 2021 with the zone change development. It had more road to develop, not as much utilities, and they're already selling lots as of about a month ago. So like,
I think we might be thinking about the same one there, but yeah, it's just, and a lot of that comes down to county stuff and rules.
Yeah,
and like I said, there's so many hands that are in a pot.
They're similar, between Georgetown and even Jessamine County, Lexington, Winchester. They have similar regs, but they're just enough different, and you're dealing with different people that, if you're not aware of that process, and if you're thinking you can maybe carry the property for a certain amount of time, and it takes longer than that, which is very likely.
So switching over to more of the, the engineering aspect as far as looking at the land, surveying the land, doing those types of things, what are those kind of like top 5 things
some of the
that
things
people need to know when it comes to like, I'm like, maybe break it apart between something that's maybe more commercial type of scenario. I want to build some flex space, or if it's a scenario where, and obviously some of that has to do with zoning. So we're kind of assuming zoning is taken out of that picture. Or if I'm like, I want to develop some kind of a home or property on something off this land type of thing. What do we have to think about?
From an engineering standpoint, there's a couple different things and I'll kind of go from the beginning. When you start a project, when you're looking at land, we get a lot of questions. We get do I need to do a geotechnical study? Do I really need to do one? Well, depending on what you're doing, it may be required, but also we usually respond with, well, how much are you putting into this project? Is this going to be a $1 million project? Do you not want to do a $5,000 or $8,000 geotechnical study to know that there's not bedrock or a sinkhole in your property when you're about to spend $1 million on something? Because it's almost like insurance. It's insurance to know what's there.
I guess that's something we don't ever think about. We're never thinking about what's underneath the ground. And I guess is that the biggest place people
that can be a big one. So most contractors, when they are proposing on your work, say, hey, let's just say we're looking at a subdivision, and you say I've got 50 lots, 2,000 linear feet of road. They'll give you a cost, and what they'll leave out is if I have to remove any rock, that's extra. Okay. And that rate will go from maybe $25 a square yard to like $100 a square yard for whatever they remove. And so that's always an add-on. So knowing going into it, like, hey, we're going to have this, please include this in your price, or at least take this in consideration, is a huge deal. And
that's something that from the engineering side they could have already determined.
That can be done in 2 to 4 weeks, and what's there. That's a big one underneath the ground. Then kind of above ground, some of the things that you can run into are jurisdictional streams and waters. That's a big one that's not only regulated with the state, but it's also regulated with federally. Okay. And so you have a state agency as well as a federal agency that has a say-so in what you're about to do.
What are they usually looking for like that? Because I know like you have to go and take water samples and different things like
Not
that
necessarily.
Sometimes.
So
or I know some people in the past have worked with those types of options.
Like on a typical due diligence, we have an environmental company that will go out and assess the site, and they're looking for a couple things. If you've got tree clusters, might be a bat habitat. And if it's a bat habitat, there's or a potential bat habitat, there are certain things that you have to do as far as one, when you can remove the trees, and if you remove the trees, you might have to pay an additional fee for removing those trees per acre of how many trees you remove. You usually can.
I gotta ask though, why the bat? Why is the bat?
It's the Indiana bat. You gotta watch out for the Indiana bat.
What is the deal with the Indiana bat?
I don't understand why that's an endangered species of some sort, and so they watch out for a potential bat habitat, and that's really not too bad. I mean, if you have a completely wooded property, you might end up costing you a pretty penny. But it's. I mean, like on the last project, we had to remove some trees, and I mean the fee on that was $10,000-$15,000 or something total. But the bigger one is going to be is your streams, and most people think of streams as a stream that's running water in it. As I shouldn't do anything in there. Well, there's the jurisdictional waters could be essentially a ditch that only has water in it when it rains. Right. And that could be considered what's called, I won't get too technical, but an ephemeral stream, and that is considered jurisdictional now. And so you may look at a property and say, I'm going to flatten all this, put houses on there, but if you're affecting more than essentially 300 linear feet of that stream, you're going to pay mitigation fees to do anything with it. Yeah, to reroute it or put it under, and that gets really costly.
And if you don't, then you probably end up finding yourself in a massive situation with flooding or something like that down the road.
Well, you could, but I'd say you'd be more get in trouble with with a federal agency. Okay. And you don't want to mess with that. And so
you've done all this work, and then you have to like rip it all back out, type of thing.
And so like we had. And those things, the things that most people might not know is, and I don't think it should, but those things can change. We had, for instance, one project where they had some ephemeral streams, and it was a big project. I mean, they're developing over 60 acres, and so they ended up paying somewhere upwards of $500,000 to mitigate the streams they were affecting on this project. And they built that same project on another site that had also ephemeral streams, but based on the current president at the time, they changed the definition of what a jurisdictional stream was, and so they had 0 fees. I had the same thing happen on another project where going into this project, they had 0 fees, but in the middle of the project, they changed the definition of what a jurisdictional stream was, and all of a sudden, they were potentially going to have to pay $300,000 to mitigate that stream. I had to look at it, reroute it, and so they didn't have to pay anything, but we had to make some adjustments to the plan just to make that work. So like there are things like that that shouldn't be moving targets that could be. And so it does you well having an engineer that knows what they're looking at on a site.
Well, I mean, what else as far as you got those 2 options, but what are some of the other things that, you know, like if somebody's got like, oh, I've got this idea, I'm going to put this here. But then you're like, well, that's not going to work here. Yeah. Because maybe it's foundation, maybe the water, but maybe some of those. So here's why it also won't work.
The big things we're looking at, we're going to look at, one, is there any swampy areas or bad soils? Because it may look fine from the surface, but if the soil is really bad, you might have to actually essentially strengthen the soil with lime stabilization, or even remove 2 foot of soil and put back stone, and that can add up, depending on the size of your project, quite a bit.
Wow.
As well as, I mean, do you have Indian burial grounds on your site? Do you have a spring? Do you have wetlands? Wetlands are big. Also, just taking into consideration like how you're going to develop it, like. Especially like in Lexington, they're big on green space, big on water quality. And so you come to a site and think you're just going to pave over the whole thing. Yeah. They're not going to let you, you're not going to get it developed. Another thing that we have a project in Lexington that's going on right now. They recently revamped their parking ordinance, where essentially they want, for this type of zoning, it's actually along Newtown Pike, they essentially want all the parking to essentially now be in the rear of the buildings. So they allow two rows of parking in the front. And they want that building right there after that.
What's the reasoning for that? Just for aesthetic purposes?
Pedestrian walkability, aesthetic reasons. Okay. They're looking at probably Washington and other states and want to mimic it.
Interesting. Is that going to be? Is that a scenario where it's going to be here on?
That's what they've established, and that what they're running into. Like this specific project, they want to put a hotel in the back of the property where it looks off on a golf course, and they're basically saying no, it needs to be in the front. So it's an oddly shaped property, so they're trying to make the best use of it. But because of this new parking ordinance, it's almost like saying, no, you have to put the building here. And so there's certain things like that you can either try and fight it, and it might be a really long battle, and you might not get it, or you can try it. You kind of got to work with planning staff quite a bit. Yeah. It's a little bit of a give and take, because they have written ordinance, written regulations, but there's also a lot of like, well, I prefer this. Right. And you can't always just step on their toes and say, well, I don't care what you prefer. I want to do this because I can do it. Because we work with them day in, day out.
Yeah, I can see the give and take aspect there, especially like, because it's one way that those systems are put in place to hopefully better the area, better the cities, in your local town, city, and so forth. But at the same time, they also, as you know, there's a lot of people who have opinions on how things should be done or how they would prefer things to look. Yeah. And it just seems like there could become a lot of give and take there.
Yeah. Well, and oftentimes developers are like, well, I don't want to do that. That costs too much. I want to do it this way. Yeah. That's never a reason to tell planning and zoning why you don't want to do what they say. They do not care what it costs. So you've got to come up with creative ways of why what they're telling you to do doesn't make sense. Gotcha. Cost feasibility is usually out the door. And they don't, and that can be one of the frustrating things. They don't usually operate on I'm using real people's money here. They're just coming in, doing their job, leaving. So they don't, in some sense, care to push stuff as much as you might as a developer. Like, I need to get this done. Like, I got to get this for the bank. And like, well, didn't get to it today. We'll get to it tomorrow.
So the short end of the story is, if you want to develop new construction-related things, just be prepared to learn patience in the process.
For sure. I mean, there's...
In that sense.
If I were to even sum up like where I would prefer to develop just currently, like obviously Lexington's a hot market. If you can develop something in Lexington, it would be great. But the cost to develop in Lexington is also much higher because of all of their processes they have set in place. Georgetown is a little bit better to develop, but they've had some issues with actually sanitary sewer availability.
Right.
You never think about that, but they've had issues with they were over capacity. So like for the last 2 years, they've essentially had like very little new development approved to actually build because they don't have availability. So if you're a developer that got a project all the way to the end and you're waiting to get it certified to go build, you can't build it because you don't have sanitary sewer availability.
You don't have a place for the crap to go.
You don't have a place for the crap to go. Exactly.
That's the easy way.
You never would think
through
that. Like
yeah.
you get to almost the end of the process or most of the way through the process and then find that out.
There's so many moving parts, and it's like you think through them all, but that's why, especially from an engineering standpoint, that's kind of your all's job, is to think through all those facets of different things, looking at sewer, looking at water grid, looking at the structure of the soil, the water,
that can be big. Like on the larger projects, we didn't touch on commercial yet, but the larger commercial industrial projects, the availability of power and the availability of water, like in the specific pressure you might need, especially if you're maybe developing out in an agricultural land. Yeah. There might be some water nearby, but it might be a mile away. So what's going to be the cost to bring that? And then even if they bring it, are you going to have enough pressure?
Do you sometimes work with clients from the reverse standpoint where they have an idea, here's what I want to do, and then it's more or less you all are kind of walking with them on the process while they're even trying to figure out the location or property that it would be fit?
Yeah, we do. We have done site selection for a lot of clients of ours. And so we've analyzed them, 5, 10 different properties with the same type of building to see which one would be most feasible to build on it. And they might have options to purchase on it. So we go through that process. We understand I think at Thoroughbred we really understand their need to process these, to analyze these properties quickly. And so we'll go through a due diligence phase on all of them where we can go actually collect geosamples, do some initial environmental lookout, and even do some initial grading and say, hey, here's going to be you've got a lot of dirt to move here, or you got to bring in dirt. That's also more expensive than even looking at the streams. We can do all that pretty quickly for clients, and that's a huge help because as a developer, you don't have that ability to do that unless you're an engineer or have some sort of background. So
absolutely not. Because, we all have dreams, or, it could be a dreamer. I want to do this and do that type of thing. But bigger the project, the more complicated it gets, for sure.
And I would say not all engineering firms are the same, too. I think at Thoroughbred, we've had a lot more developer focus. And I think we take a lot of pride in, 95% of all of our projects are built.
Oh, really?
And most engineering, or even especially architects, can't say that. It can be easy to here's the product, I'm done with it.
You can do a lot of work and
you can do a lot of work and never actually be built.
Yeah.
We take a lot of pride that we get a lot of our projects, built. And so since I've been there for 5 years now, I've gotten to see most of my projects actually built out.
Yeah.
And that's one of the coolest things to see.
I would say and then your background without your other aspect of being an entrepreneur and having your own properties, and we talked about privately. I'm just waiting for the day where you just marry the two, the engineering and just start. Hey, I'm just going to start developing properties myself, kind of a thing one day. So it's going to be kind of exciting to see where you go with that. Maybe
it's been really neat. I love what I do. I love the aspects of it, and especially I love that I'm getting to learn on the job to see. On the back end, how developers are putting deals together and how they extend these out, especially on these larger projects. I was able to be on the main engineer for App Harvest, a huge company that developed over, I think, 5.7 million square feet of greenhouse in the last 3 years. And so to see how something like that gets built, designed and built, is pretty unique. To see that. Yeah. So being able to bring that mindset to projects, I think, is huge. I'll just highlight one of the projects that we were able to find just on my own from the real estate standpoint. Like before we ended up moving to the farm we're on, which my dad owns, I was like, the only way I'm going to get some land is if I can figure out how to develop it and then keep a portion of it.
Yeah.
And so I was just on a search, and I found some. This was actually in Jessamine County, and ended up bringing it to some developers that we were currently working for, and say, hey, I've already looked at this property. It's perfect. Like, I did all the analysis on my own. I was looking at it. I was like, we can get at least 27 lots on here. I was being as conservative as possible. And then we ended up getting 43 lots on there.
Oh, wow.
And I don't know, there's
something for, man, if I could do that myself all on my own one day.
Exactly. So, but it was just a really unique process because we've been able to partner with them actually on this development and be a part of it, like as an engineering company, even a part of this development as it's been getting built. And so, not many engineering companies would do that either.
Gotcha.
So,
that's cool. And it's exciting to see where it's going and stuff like that. And I know the technology is changing rapidly for engineering, which is cool. And I don't want to dive deep in that and stuff like that. But I'm sure in your market, just like most others, that it's rapidly changing as far as how quickly things may be able to be done, or and that maybe were more time consuming than they were in the past and so forth. But yeah, it's going to be exciting to see kind of where you go with your obviously real estate investing and everything, or one day if you kind of put those two worlds together. As we kind of wrap up, I mean, I always kind of ask, what's your favorite thing about Kentucky? Obviously, it's not the 60 to 80 degree constant like Costa Rica is, or as you would say, we say Costa Rica. How do they?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica.
But as far as Kentucky, what's one of your favorite things about just?
And I love the rolling hills.
Yeah.
The rolling hills. Well, it varies, but usually that. When the sun's going down and it's just shining, just everything's bright green and on the rolling hills. Yeah. Just that's one of my favorite things, driving home, seeing that. But horse country, getting to go, camping at the gorge, going hiking around there. Lexington is just a great city too, because it's the
and to the green
town.
part, you don't realize how green it is till you start traveling outside. If you're from Kentucky, and then I've necessarily known people that have moved here and just they thought it was fake, like how green, the grass and the rolling hills were, just compared to a lot of the other parts of the country and so forth. So, yeah, I've definitely, I don't like to mow my grass anymore if I can get away with not doing that. But I still love just the freshly cut lawn and everything like that. With
you get one of those robots that.
Yeah, I've been looking at it. Those robots. I'm like, one day I'm going to get a robot that. Just keeps my yard at a almost consistent, constant level. I mean, that'd be great. It's a little high price right now, and you got to have. And I think from my research, some of them don't do great with certain levels of inclines, which in Kentucky could be a bit of a
challenge.
Bit of a challenge. But definitely that's going to come around and be much more of a applicable thing that I definitely am going to do one day for sure. Unless I buy more land, and then it's just not feasible at that point.
You have to have an
army or one of those drones. There's commercial ones out there. I know they're developing, so you have to get some kind of larger commercial one. But well, Daniel, appreciate your time. Thanks for your insights on stuff, and we will see everybody back for another episode on the podcast next week. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you.
To learn more about this podcast, visit our page at keystothecommonwealth.com. To connect with Landry regarding insuring your investment portfolio, email Landry at novainsuranceGroup.com or call 859-687-2004.